You know, it's so nice to be here amongst such esteemed company. So many of you supporting each other, supporting other fathers, supporting children. And whether you're a protester or whatever you do, I know there's very little thanks. And so firstly, I'd just like to say thank you. This lady that we had before, I've written to her a few times and she writes back. She's one of the few people that writes back, and there's a lot of very impressive women, and I just thought I'd name another couple. That was Professor Janice Flamingo, but there's also Erin Pizzi, Karen Strawn, and this brilliant lady in Australia called Bettina Arndt, and they're all fairly active men's rights activists, and they're interesting to follow. I'm talking about activism. I've done a little bit of protesting. Hans and I went to Wellington last year in October, and some of us stood there in the rain for the day, and standing there looking up at these Parliament buildings, it's pretty damn depressing. And just a couple of weeks after we were there, another man was there with very similar signs to what we had, and his name was Sid Hanslick, and he burnt himself alive outside Parliament that day. He was there. He'd been protesting outside the family court as well. He was a father's rights activist. I became interested in men's issues after an experience I had in 2014. I didn't know much about domestic violence at that point. It was like everybody else. All I thought it was men hitting women, and because I'd seen thousands of posters and TV shows and ads, and it's the same thing, a white man's fist and a woman in the background sheltered like this. Same every ad, and it's always a white guy for some reason. And then I had an experience. I had a girlfriend come to live with me down in Christchurch, and she was a bit hard work, and we'd sort of agreed to separate, and she was still in the place. And anyway, she attacked me one morning quite violently, and she was hitting me and chasing me around the apartment, and she picked up an electrical cord and tried to lash me with that, and then tried to smash me with a wall mirror. And a couple of hours later, she'd gone to the police and admitted that she'd attacked me, but she'd alleged that I'd retaliated. And she didn't just claim that I'd hit her back, she claimed that I'd thrown her to a tiled floor and savagely beat her repeatedly with punches and kicks. She said, I don't know how long it went on for. And so the police came and arrested me without question. I was taken to the cells and put in a concrete seat, and then the officer comes back and says, well, it's time for your video interview now. And I said, well, can I speak to a lawyer? He said, well, yeah, after your video interview. And eventually he relented and put me on the phone to a lawyer, and the lawyer said, well, and I said, you know, look, it's Saturday morning, I just want to make a statement and get out of here, I've got a busy weekend. And he said, well, there's a bit of a problem with that. If you haven't done anything wrong, then the police have no evidence against you, and they'll be still needing some. So they'll be looking for something in your statement that they can use against you in court. He said, you absolutely cannot make a statement. So I was held in a cell for days. I was a very quiet little visitor in there, and then I eventually got wagoned to court and bailed, and part of the bail conditions were that she got to keep my flat, she got to keep all my stuff, and it all seemed very unfair to me. And I was having a really difficult time. And I actually felt, for the first time in my life, extreme anger. And thankfully, there was some help. I discovered this men's site that John Potter runs, and got some I posted all about it and got some very good advice and a bit of understanding, a bit of help. I wasn't the first to go through this kind of thing, so that was a really valuable outlet for me to have that help. And also I went to see Don Pennant from the Canterbury Men's Centre, and we sat out the back and smoked cigarettes and had a bit of a yarn about it, and that was really helpful too. And I was that stressed that I couldn't actually work. I'm a tiler by trade, and I'd be in there working, and there's the homeowner's wife going, well, who's gonna hurry up? We've got this plumber behind you, and who's gonna hang the towel rails and all this stuff? And I'm standing there with a trowel in my hand, you know, worried that I was just snap and take somebody's bloody head off with it. I found myself, just walking down the road, I found myself walking on the side of the pavement in case somebody bumped into me. I might, you know, be reactive. And it's only really, this is 4 years ago, and it's really only the last few months that I'm starting to get over this anger, and I'm starting to cheer up and be a happy person again. So eventually I got a hearing in court. It cost me thousands of dollars for this barrister. And the prosecutor stood up and said, well, actually, we don't have any evidence against this man. And the judge says, well, you can go. And I said, well, that's great, but on the statement you've got there in front of you, it says he wouldn't answer me, so I hit him in the head. That was, she admitted most of the attack that she'd done. And I said, why is that part not a crime? Why is the violence against me not a crime? And, oh, well, it doesn't really work like that. You know, we just finger a perpetrator and we finger a victim, and that's exactly what they did. And so I went through, and the judge says, you need to go and lodge a complaint with the Independent Police Complaints Authority, which I did unsuccessfully. And
the independent one?
Yeah, the independent one. And I also went back to the same police station, the Christchurch Central Police Station, over 30 times and said, look, I'm just here to make another little complaint about the way I was treated and the fact that my complaint isn't taken seriously. Eventually, after I think about it was over 30 times, an officer comes in. He had this big file in front of him, which was obviously the case file. And he says, the only reason this file gets opened is if we decide to charge you again. Yeah, and so now we, after being involved with this little win at the Human Rights Commission last year, I've put in my own complaint to the Human Rights Commission about the way I was treated and the fact that, I'm claiming that I was discriminated against because I was a male victim of domestic violence, and I've written the story. With the genders reversed, and it reads like a really stupid black comedy. It would just never happen to a female, what happened to me. It would imagine a guy walking into a police station and saying, look, she's come home at an inappropriate time, she wouldn't tell me where she'd been, so I hit her in the head. But I'm here to complain that she retaliated, she savagely beat me up. Oh, and by the way, they sent her straight to the hospital, and there was not a single bruise found on her, apart from one on the back of her hand, and she admitted to the doctor that she didn't know whether she'd been hit at all. You know, so it just seemed very bizarre to me that they would carry that charge through, and it was a big wake up for me, what it's like for male victims of domestic violence. That day that I was put in that cell, and I was kept there for days, by the way, you know, there's always someone in a worse situation with you than you, and there was another man in the very same town who was having a worse day. In fact, it was his funeral. His name was Corey Protos. He was a young man. He'd been dating this girl for 7 weeks. She had bundled him up in a blanket and tortured and beat him for hours. There was other people there, and they had no problem with him being killed. They just didn't want him being killed there. So she put him in a car somehow and took him off to another premises where she bundled him up and continued to beat and torture him with a blanket over him, apparently. And then when she got bored with that, she got an electrical cord and she wrapped it 3 times around his neck and she strangled him to death. She rolled his body under the bed, and then the very next morning she started texting her friends, "Oh, can someone bring me some cleaning products and some petrol?" Now this woman could not be tried for murder. She could only be tried for manslaughter. I cannot, for the life of me, figure out that when you wrap a cord around someone's neck 3 times, you don't know that the result might be death. And so she served, but by the time, it was 3 years before that hearing, she got a hearing, and the judge says, well, you know, just go and see your parole officer, off you go home, sweet ass. It was, all the media was about how she was a victim herself because the father had access of the children and had care of the children. And there's a photo online of her parents coming out of court, the grieving parents, his parents rather, grieving parents wearing their white ribbon. And it just the whole thing just made me sick. I understand now how male victims of domestic violence hate white ribbon. And I join them. I despise the entire thing, and I think it's probably doing more harm than good. All these white ribbon heroes that are running around saying we must stop violence against women and children. Yes, that would be great if we also included men in it. And that's why I like this black ribbon campaign, and I'd like to have a lot more to do with this campaign. I'd like to go around police stations and say, how about just for a month, you put this one out and throw these fucking white ribbons away, because they're not helping the situation. And I think there could be some real inroads into domestic violence if we just included everybody that could suffer from it. And yeah, and I think it's pretty much. Yeah, well, I probably should have put more time into my complaint with them. But I did outline everything. They just said, oh, we followed all procedures, no problem. Yeah. There's no point in going through and I just want to mention, there's no point in going anywhere else except the Human Rights Commission. If you've got a complaint and you think it's discrimination, take it to them, because surprisingly enough, hey Kerry, we won one. We won one there at the Human Rights Commission. And I recommend to anybody that if you've got a complaint, just go to them. Yeah. When my accuser made the complaint, they promised her right there and then that I would be arrested and I'd be held in a cell at least till Monday afternoon, and everything swung into place without even questioning me. And that to me was the biggest crime. I would have expected, because I had no history of violence, there'd never been a complaint or anything. I expected them to ring me up and say, Mr. Baldwin, we've got some serious allegations against you. You better come down here and answer some questions. And I thought we'd just deal with it as men should. But no, it was, okay, we've got a victim, we've got a perpetrator. There we go. You know. Well, I think they need to put more men in prison each year than they did last year. And yeah, well, I can't even. It didn't matter how much I spent on a barrister. I never got. It stays on record as unproven. And I just can't unprove it. I don't get a hearing. You know, we're all gynocentric as fuck. Yep. Well, the government tells us that we're the most abusive in the entire world. And some of us have looked it up. Turns out we don't make the list of the top 26 countries. But anyway, yeah. I'm supposed to believe that all my mates after Friday beersies go home and beat their missus up, you know, and I don't really believe it's quite as like they say it is. We've also got results from New Zealand studies and 200 international studies that tell us that interpartner violence is slightly more committed by females than it is males. We're told by these feminists that all violence is a male construct. Even when a woman's violent, that's because it's a learned behaviour from men. All violence must be a male construct. And they can't really explain why there's more interpartner violence in lesbian relationships than there is gay relationships. On the list of places to protest against, I would like to see the coroner's office, because they should be inquiring when there's a suicide, there's no inquiry. Was this man a victim of domestic violence? Was this man a victim of parental alienation? And without those questions being asked by the coroner, then we're never to know. And yeah, it's not funny, but yeah. Well, recently we had some stats out that for every $1 spent on men's health, there's $17 spent on female health.
Thank you very much. That's great.